This is WGBB AM 1240 and W240 GM FM 95.9 Freeport, New York.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Real Estate Plate. As always, I'm your host, Nick Sakalis, coming to you live from the WGBB studios here in America, New York. And today I gave WGBB a little bit of extra time to get their commercials and their extra endorsements in because I have one of those late traffic days that held me back. So you're welcome. But all jokes aside, it's been another, I'll say, interesting week in real estate. Another bomb was dropped on the real estate world, and I'm going to get into that today, and I'll give everybody a little bit of insight of my thoughts of how I view it, and I guess how it's going to affect us going down the line. But before I go into that, I want to address something that was actually sent to me by multiple people in reference to getting more exposure through social media and web presence. And one of the things that people have been asking me, and something that I haven't really gotten that much into, is TikTok. Now, TikTok is one of these other really rapidly growing social media platforms, and I did set up an account this past week just to test it out and see how it works. And from my gathering and from what I see from a lot of the younger generations out there, this is really geared towards millennials and maybe under millennials. This is really for the youth and that kind of thing. So in my personal opinion, I don't know if it actually is something that somebody in my demographic would want to apply to their business model or their social media presence. I guess everybody has a different angle of how to go across it. The individuals that I see that do have a big following that are in my age group are mostly celebrities and that kind of a thing. So they do have a following regardless. But it's kind of a divide. I mean, you have some older generations as well, baby boomers, that are actually getting involved in it as well. Some of them are actually taking off, but it's almost like the millennials and the younger generation are making fun of them. So, you know, I've come to the conclusion that everybody that's past 35, 40 years old is in their minds a boomer. And, you know, I'm a Gen Xer, but in the TikTok world, it looks like everybody that's in that group and above are boomers. So I'm not sure if it's actually going to be something that, you know, maybe the younger agents could actually apply it and use it and make it part of their model and get it into their presence and social media campaigns and that kind of thing. I also noticed that it's not really a vehicle that you really want to advertise in. So it's a kind of, you know, a work in progress. I'll be honest with you. I'm going to keep testing it out over the next few weeks and see how it works out, and I'll report back to everybody in regards to that. But at this moment, it's inconclusive for me as far as how viable or not it is. So for those people that are interested in getting involved, you might want to take the same process that I'm going right now. It's just putting your toe in the water and see how it works for you. I don't know yet as far as how to be able to work it. Everybody knows that LinkedIn has been a really valuable tool for me. I love that as a social media platform as far as being able to network and get great business from. Facebook is a good presence and establishment kind of a presence to have, along with Instagram and Twitter. Like I said, I'm not very good at Twitter, so that's been another one that hasn't worked for me that well. But we'll see how this you know, TikTok is gonna be applied, but I'm not necessarily 100% on board yet. I might be a believer in a couple of weeks, or with a given time of being able to work it and be able to understand it a little bit more. But at this point, I'm thinking of it as more of a, it's more of a social thing, kind of, more of a community thing, and it's not something that you really want to be endorsing business in. And I think if you take that approach towards there, you won't get much of a following, or if you do get a following, it'd be just to make fun of you kind of a thing. So I'm not even sure if that's the greatest approach, but we'll find out. Sooner or later, I'll finish my research, so to say, on it and see how I can make it work. That being said, the real story of today is getting into the latest news that had been dropped on us by New York State, and that's in regards to the way rental commissions are being applied. A couple of days ago, last week, the New York State, we got alerts from DOS and NYC basically alerting that brokers can no longer collect commissions from tenants. And it came to a huge surprise to a lot of people, especially people that same day were actually in the process of finishing up a transaction and they're supposed to do a lease signing and we're supposed to get paid. So that was actually something that was a real shocker, and it actually put things into a little bit of chaos. Things are kind of aligning right now. The latest, as far as that's concerned, that has been kind of pushed back in business as usual up until March 13th, as far as the latest information that I got. So, there could be commissions applied to tenants going back, up until that date for now, unless that changes again. But I wanted to kind of do an overview of the way the rental process has worked for years here in New York. For years, most of the time, you have a landlord, they have an apartment or a space for rent, they turn around to a agent or broker and they say, okay, I'm going to hire you to list this property, and you put it out there, but you're going to get paid from the tenant. And that was accepted by the tenants for years, and that was the way it worked. Now, if we think of it from a rational point of view and a logical point of view, the landlord should have been the one that's paying, because they're the ones that are actually hiring you, and you're representing them, and you're obviously trying to get them the most amount of rent for that space. Almost same concept as when you're leasing a commercial space. That's how it should, it sounds logical to me from that aspect, because that's how it works in a lot of other states, which is worked at a different kind of pace. So rents have been somewhat, even though people are saying rents have been going through the roof, and they've been going higher and higher, but you also have limited amount of space that's available, and good limited amount of space that's available that people are willing to pay for. And that's on a whole different level of all the stops and the type of halts that they put into the rental guidelines in New York State in this past June. But it was applied that the tenant paid for it, and it somewhat subdued the growth of rent, if you think about it to a certain extent, because now you have a tenant that would have been responsible to pay for a month of rent, the first month of moving in, their moving costs, and then a broker's fee. So that was an extra expense that sometimes made it a little difficult for tenants to be able to pay a little bit more rent. Take that out of the equation, take that out of the picture, it might be giving opportunity for rents to escalate even more than they have in the past. And this is only applying to free market rents, because as we all know, the stabilized and rent control markets are in chaos right now. I went really into that last week as far as the way the model has been working. And that's still another work in progress, and we don't know how it's going to, at the end, work the market. But now the way the law is shifting and the way they're presenting it, and this is being fought tooth and nail by NYSAR, NAR, and all the multiple listing places and all the brokerages and that kind of thing, of trying to fight it. But at the end of the day, I feel that this law, if it actually takes fruition in the way they're making it out to be, is going to hurt the tenants. And this is my logic and my reasoning why. For the agents and brokers, yes, they're going to have to change their model as far as how they are going to get compensated for the work. And eventually, landlords will have to come into grips that they're going to have to pay the professionals to find them qualified tenants, unless they're willing to do the work themselves. And a lot of the larger landlords have their own in-house operations with their own property managers that could do that for them. Some of the smaller landlords that don't have that luxury will actually have to bite the bullet at the end of the day and hire people to get it done, especially when it comes down to the whole opening up for them back and forth, getting stood up for no-show appointments, qualifying them based on background checks and credit checks and that kind of stuff. So eventually they're going to have to come to terms. It might go through a couple of years of growing pains as far as having to try it themselves and maybe not getting the results they're necessarily looking for, but eventually they're going to come to terms, and then eventually they're going to have to start hiring the professionals in that manner. So agents and brokers are typically going to be okay in the long run. In the short run, it might give them a little bit of a headache, and it might actually hurt their income base for a little while, especially the agents that are completely focused on rental type of properties. And there's a lot of them out there, especially if you're going to the boroughs, Queens, Brooklyn, the city. You have tons of agents that their bread and butter is actually doing rentals. And in a lot of cases, they're dealing with very small landlords that just can't afford to pay commissions out. And they're going to lose that source of business. So it's going to be really tough, difficult, and they're going to have to adjust their model in order to make it work. Again, if this all goes through completely and sticks, we don't know yet if this is going to be the end result of what we're looking at. And tenants are typically going to be free range without having to pay commissions out there. And by doing so, they're going to feel less inhibited by financial restrictions that would hold them back as far as move-out costs. And that extra month that they would have had to pay, typically extra month, because sometimes commissions will go on percentages and that kind of thing. But let's say, just say on the average, it's about a month. Could go a long way as far as them being able to go into something that's a little bit nicer than they would have been able to get into previously, or something bigger, or something, and not have to settle as much as they would have before. But here's where the kicker starts. And this has already been one of those things that have come to me. Multiple landlords that decided, okay, we're going to adapt, and they're going to be the early adopters of just paying the commissions. And business as usual. The only difference is they're going to escalate the rents. And this only applies to free market rents. So let's just say for argument's sake, you have a typical $3,000 apartment that, or well, let's make it even smaller. Let's say a $2,000 apartment that landlord before was perfectly fine with taking the $2,000. However, now they're going to be forced to pay a commission and decide they're going to make the rental price $2,200 instead of $2,000. So now that extra $200 a month is going to cover their commission and then some. Because think about it, at the end of the day, it's going to generate actually more income for them because 12 times 200 is 2,400. And they're only going to pay out about $2,000 in commissions. And the tenant, yes, they're saving it up front, but at the long term, they're going to be paying it more going in. So that's why I say the tenants are going to end up paying more in this kind of situation. Now, the state and the city could turn around and put additional restrictions on the rental guidelines. You know, the way they're going, they're changing their minds and applying new laws every day. So we don't know what to expect going forward as far as the way the state and the city is going to be reacting. We do definitely know they are anti-landlord, and they're basically doing everything they can to make it lopsided from the tenant side. But here's the thing. Every time they apply a new law, just as I pointed out, with the variance in the increase in rents, the other side is going to find a loophole and a way to get around it. And it goes back to what I keep saying. We need to find some kind of even keel towards approach, some kind of middle ground that will not necessarily hurt one side to make the other side, put the other side in a better situation. You know, if both sides are hurting a little bit, not necessarily getting everything they want, but they can live with it, that's that's a successful negotiation. You know, you're getting it coming from both sides. You need to make sure that both sides don't necessarily get only damage, they get some benefits out of it, and vice versa. You know, it's one of those things that it's really hard to like really grasp in my like I've always been pro capitalism and growth and small business and that kind of thing. And believe me or not, somebody that becomes a landlord and becomes a professional landlord at one point is running a small business. Just because it's, you know, not something that they're selling as a product and that kind of thing, their apartments are their products or their rentals are their products. And to put continuous restraints onto that product or that way of conducting business, it's just hampering them in many different ways. And at the end of the day, there is going to be a day of reckoning and things that are going to go into full cycle. And I strongly believe this, and I really like the one thing I do know, history has a way of repeating itself. When all these laws first took place, as far as going and making apartments stabilized and controlled, it was for a good reason, and it was for a noble intent. At the time, the landlords were kicking and screaming because they went from completely having no boundaries and no restrictions to now being restrained as far as what type of increases and how they could apply themselves as far as whenever they had a vacancy. And it was painful for them at that point. But you forget, it also went from complete free reign at that point. So fast forward the clock a few decades after that, they hit in place. And the system was where a lot of the landlords found a way to destabilize their apartments and make them free market, therefore not being restrained by the same kind of laws that held them back under the stabilized and rent control type of basis. So when that hit, and when you saw that take full effect, you started to see the rent started to escalate more and more and more. And, you know, everybody was saying the sky is falling because of that reason. However, there's still an enormous amount of stabilized apartments and rent controlled apartments still in existence. Now everybody's focusing on the uber high priced rentals. And I also believe that a market has a way of correcting themselves. If the rentals are so excessively high that tenants can't afford to move into, eventually you're going to have a ton of vacancies, which will bring the percentage of vacancies to an unsustainable level, therefore forcing the landlords to self-adjust and bring down the rents. It's supply and demand. It's a very simple economics, the concept. Supply and demand. So the city decided they're not going to let that play itself out. They're going to intervene and stop that process of supply and demand from taking place by artificially subduing the existing rents and this existing inventory. So in my full belief, and I've said this in the past in other shows, I really and truly believe this is going to happen, that we're going to turn back the clocks and we're going to get to the point of the 70s and 80s where you see a ton of buildings deteriorating and falling apart, where landlords are just putting the very bare minimum into their buildings because, one, they can't afford to put more than that because they can't collect their rents. Two, if they do put more in that, they can't put a increase based on a percentage of what they just spent in there. And three, and this is the one thing that for some reason or another everybody's not like paying attention to, taxes are continuously growing. Electricity, utilities, water bills. Has anybody seen a water bill in New York City lately? They're astronomical. And it's not the water, it's the sewer bill, the portion of it that's going through the roof. So you have that portion. You have the taxes that are constantly escalating. You have the utilities that are constantly going up. Materials and labor is not getting any cheaper either. So how do you expect these landlords to be able to keep up with these expenses? All they're going to do is keep putting as many Band-Aids on things as possible in order to just keep it from falling apart. And hopefully, they'll stay within code and not be in violation mode because of their economic hardship, and cause a scenario of build one building after another and development after another starting to deteriorate. And what's going to happen at the end of the day? The tenants are not going to be happy. Their living and environment where they're accustomed to is going to be downgraded year over year. As much as they holler and scream about having things done, if the landlords are doing everything by law that's required, they're not going to be at fault. So what's going to happen? You know, what's going to happen? The person that has that 30-year-old kitchen or 40-year-old kitchen that looks like, you know, let's not mince words, looks like complete crap and it's depressing, and they really want a kitchen to be changed, and they're willing to pay an increase if the landlord is willing to do it, won't happen because the landlord just won't do it because they will not be allowed to put that increase in place. And this is the thing that's really kooky. It's one of those situations that's just like, come on, it makes sense. They're spending more money into the place. Yes, they're not going to ask for, like, if they do a $40,000 rental on an apartment unit, they're not going to ask for the tenant to pay that entire $40,000 in 1 year. But over time, they'll split it up and make it, you know, reasonable to be split up over the rents to be able to cover that expense. At least they'll get a return on their money. But what is going to happen? I promise you, it's going to get to the point where there's going to be so much neglect and places of deterioration and quality of life going down that the city and the state is going to end up turning around and reversing things. Not necessarily reversing things to where they were before, but what's going to happen is going to turn around and give incentives to the landlords. Please spend some money again. Improve your property, and by doing so, we're going to give you this incentive, whatever they come up with at that point. And then what's going to happen is you're going to have the reversal of gears, and you're going to have a situation where you're going to see now the tenants getting the harder part of the deal, because once again, they're not going to find a middle ground. Well, I don't understand why it's rocket science and why it's so difficult for our politicians to find something that will make both sides a little happy, and maybe it'll make both sides a little uncomfortable, but at the same time actually make it palatable for both sides. Why does it have to be to the point where you're making one side completely happy at the detriment of the other side? You can't. I don't know. Maybe I'm naive. Maybe I don't understand the way the world works. I do know that they follow who has the most votes, and I'll say this much, that a lot of the laws and decisions we make are based on whoever has the most votes, not necessarily because it's the right thing that needs to be done. It's because the people that are going to keep them in office have the most amount of votes. But I'm not going to keep getting on that, and I'm not going to keep making this political show. It's definitely not the idea behind this. But I'm going to read a couple things that came from the Department of State based on this last stuff that came in this week. And I'm just going to say how this took into consideration. Like, the first thing that they say, do the acts restrict application fees for rentals? Yes, they do restrict application fees, and they're capped off at $20. And I kind of understand that, because you had a ton of application fees that were padded and overexerted that property managers were benefiting from, landlords were benefiting from, because let's say it cost them $20 to do a credit check. They would charge $100, whether you got in or not, and then pocket the additional profit from there. I get that. You don't want to gouge people just to check the credit or backgrounds or whatever the case is. But the only problem with that is you do have some that are a little more extensive, and they might be a little more costly to the landlords, and the landlord would have to actually eat the difference. And you do that enough times, it could become costly on each individual basis. So that's one of the things that people understand, and that's kind of where it stemmed off, as far as where the fees that are passed down to the tenants are. They want to limit everything at $20, and they interpreted that to also include any kind of brokerage fees. Okay. Again, from a broker and an agent standpoint, in our industry, we're going to get paid from one side, or we're going to get paid from the other. It's in order to do a job. But because of this situation, the way it's going on, it's to the detriment of somebody. And I'll give you a perfect scenario and a perfect example. Let's say you have somebody that's moving in from Texas to New York, or from North Carolina to New York, or from wherever, and they're not here. One of the services that the brokers did to actually help these people out was to actually go and scout properties ahead of them actually coming to the state, to narrow it down and pick out the right places for them, and to actually make their limited amount of time of searching for apartments most beneficiary by going through the process first. And I'll tell you, I have team members that would sit going around with their phone, going FaceTime throughout an apartment or a rental with the person on the other line that might be in California or wherever they're coming from, and showing them, what do you think of this? This is the way the layout navigates, because you're not going to get the full extent and the idea from the picture. You get a good general idea from the pictures, but sometimes, especially in these spaces that might have a quirky layout or just different layout or just really have bad pictures, they want to get a better understanding of what they're going to be seeing. So by navigating and doing FaceTime through the place and letting know this is what the space really looks like, you could turn around and say, okay, perfect, please book this one as an appointment for when we get there, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, by changing the laws up, what you're doing is taking away that service from these people, because you're not going to have an agent running all over the place, showing all spaces, especially if they know they're not going to get compensated in certain places, because there's going to be plenty of spaces that could be really suitable for these people that are coming from out of town that might not be publicly listed. They might be listed for rent by owner or by landlord. And because they're not paying the compensation, or they refuse to pay the compensation, they're going to try to do it themselves. So therefore, you're putting the agents in a position of not wanting to show that space because they're going to work for free, basically. It's only common sense. Nobody's going to run around for a couple of weeks like a chicken without their heads with a stupid phone running around and doing FaceTime all over the place if they know they're not going to get paid. It just makes sense. So that's one of the services that people are going to lose. It's one of those things that people don't get, the relocation. You know, we deal with big corporations that are bringing in people in from international waters, from all over the country, from wherever. China, Japan, Europe. They're coming from all over the place, and they need somebody to scout out these spaces. But now they cannot get compensated directly by these people. So they're going to miss out on possible good opportunities. Now, the landlord paying the commissions on a rental is not new. And it's been going on in big developments and places that maybe are new construction or new developments or place in the city, that you have professional landlords or professional management companies that know how the system works, and they want to get quality, good tenants in there, and they wanted to pay top dollar. And for years, they've been offering out opportunities for tenants to get in there without having to pay the commission, but they'll pay the agent that's representing them, and that worked out well. But the problem is you don't have that many landlords yet that have been psychologically built up to this because of the way they've done business for years. You got a guy that has a 6-family house that the past 30 years, they know I'm not paying a commission. It's going to take a lot for them to be able to put that into their minds and actually understand how to work with that. So, like I said, it's one of those things that it's going to be a work in progress. It's going to be one of those things that we don't know how everything's going to fall once the dust settles. But, you know, keep tuned. Again, this is, in my personal opinion, going to hurt the landlords, the tenants, a lot more than it's going to hurt all the other parties for the long run. Initially, it might help, but, you know, I have a feeling it's really going to hurt people, really, really hurt people down the line. You know, but it is what it is. I mean, we had stories coming from New York Times, from Wall Street Journal, from CNN, from you name it, and everybody's putting their 2 cents in. And I'm not sure how many of them actually took the same logical standpoint that I did, but there have been a few of them that are looking at it as something that long term could be very, very damaging to people. You know, it's what it is. You know, I really believe in capitalism and letting the market work itself out and supply and demand. And believe me, if what people are asking for is not sustainable, the market would have a way of correcting itself. Landlords are not going to live with having 50% of vacancies in their buildings just for the sake of having 50% vacancy in the building because they want to get what they want to get. Eventually, they would have to come to terms and actually reduce their rental rates to get the places occupied. I mean, it's not that far of the same concept of when people sell their places. You could ask for whatever you ask for on a place that you're selling, and 1 month goes by, 2 months go by, 6 months go by. Some cases, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years go by, and they're still not getting what they are asking for. Eventually, they come to terms and say, okay, I'm going to have to see what the market's dictating and basically either live with what is being offered to me or change gears and not put it out there. That's just how it is, you know. And there has been talks as far as landlords being penalized for having vacant units, and that's a very dangerous road. I believe that legislators and the politicians are taking as far as penalizing people for keeping vacant units in their buildings by either slapping on fines or raising their taxes, because now you're taking away people's rights. If somebody has a house, they own the house, they have the right to keep it empty if they want to. Nobody's stopping them. If they're willing to pay whatever the taxes are at that given point and we're willing to maintain and sustain the place for that amount of time, who's anybody to tell them you have to rent it out? What if they, have sentimental reasons why they're keeping it out? Maybe a loved one or somebody that they knew very well lived in that place and they just don't want to have anybody else rent it, at least for the time being. They have to go through the grieving process. Who's going to stop? How are you going to be managing that? So if they start enforcing stuff like that, and there's indications that is happening, you're going to have a real disastrous type of scenario. You're going to have the big players keep vacant units regardless, even if they do increase the rents. It's just going to happen. Somebody that had a $200-$300 unit and that just got off of rent control and could only raise it X amount of dollars, they're not going to rent it out for that much. It's just not, because it probably would cost them more to rent it out than to keep it empty. Don't forget, a lot of these buildings, they're paying for the heat, they're paying for the water, they're paying for a lot of things. And a lot of tenants, let's be honest, when you don't have to pay for things often, you're not really that respectful of how much waste you're doing. So in other words, if you have your water bill paid for and your hot water bill paid for, and you're running full 2-hour showers or baths, nobody's going to stop you, because that's what you want to do. Where if you were in your own house, you were mindful and you're paying the bills, you'd be a little bit more, careful about what you're doing. Or if you had a separate meter that was charging for that, you'd be a little bit mindful doing that. But, it's human nature where you're not going to care as much. Same thing if you had your own thermostat in an apartment. That's why most apartments don't have thermostats separated for themselves. Why? Because somebody could be blasting the heat at 85 degrees and having the windows open. And believe me, I've seen this with my own eyes. The place could be like hell. That's how hot it is in the building. And people keep the windows open. And what they do is go up and complain that it's too cold. It's, not everybody's the same way, but you get a lot of that. And that kind of abuse causes reactions from the landlords. And, you just have a really bad situation altogether. There's no way to have a perfect balance. There's just not. But we have to find solutions and ways to make both sides a little happier, a little less miserable. Yes, you're going to have to give up a little bit from both sides, but not so much that it's going to be to their detriment. It has to be one of those scenarios where you're basically trying to work it out in the best way for all parties. Now, you're gonna have people that hate what I have to say for one reason or another, and that's okay. Everybody has their own opinion, just like I have my opinion on this matter. And everybody's gonna look at it from a different set of eyes. But I'm trying to be as neutral and as balanced as I humanly can, because I understand both sides. I've represented both sides. I get it. You can't you can't keep pummeling one section of the economy to make the other one better. You can't do that. But then you can't reverse things by doing it to the opposite end. It's just what it is, and it's really hard for me to put the words of how this is really panning out. And I'm in the process of writing out a blog about this whole matter, and I think after I actually put my thoughts on paper and kind of break it down, people will really understand more about how this is going to affect us in the future. But I'm hoping that this is not the end of what we're looking at, that they will get adjusted. They'll be able to find some kind of meeting of minds to be able to somehow correct the over-the-top type of approach they've taken. And when I say they, I mean the state and the city. And hopefully, it helps everybody out. As far as the latest that we talked about with the commission standards, it's just what it is. We constantly get these changes happening. We have to apply ourselves to the law and be able to work out. We've got a lot of bombs dropped on us over the past year and a half. Whether it's how the state tax gets affected and domestic taxes city taxes and state taxes get affected, and not being able to take deductions of past $10,000 off of your federal taxes. That was a major one. The big screw up that happened with the politicians and with Amazon was another major one. The way that whole discrimination scandal that we were looking at through the investigation that happened with Newsday, that was a big screw up. Because I'll tell you something that was another screw up. A lot of those instructors, New York State was actually supposed to send people observing and regulate how these classes were being taught, how they were being taught, and they never did so, or they did it on a limited basis, not enough to make sure that everybody was doing the right thing. That doesn't forgive the people that made the wrong decisions and didn't do it the way they needed to. But at the same time, this could have been stopped a long time ago if the state was regulating in a better way. You had all these things happening. The list goes on and on. This past year was one of the almost like a hit parade of adjustments and changes. We might have more of that in 2020, and I don't know how that's going to affect the overall markets. But for some reason, I'll say this much: the market has been resilient and has been pushing along, and places have been selling. Vacancies are not as high as you would expect. We'll see. It's one of those things, and we're in an election year on top of it, so it's a very interesting road where we're going down right now, and all the decisions that are going to be made, and all the laws that are going to be implemented right now will affect us for quite a few years in the future. And hopefully they start making the right decisions going forward. But we'll see. That being said, we're coming to the end of the show. I will not be here next week because of winter break. And I will be back again the following week. As always, have a great night. Have a great week. And I'll see you next time on the Real Estate Plate, just like every Monday, between 6 to 7. Which is not next week, the following. Have a great night.